Hello, and welcome to Trey's Building a Workflow in Just 10 Minutes. My name is Jonathan, and today I'm going to show you just how easy it is to build a workflow. By the end of this, you'll be able to take a request that you receive and, using some simple logic we'll cover, turn that request into a workflow. You'll be able to build and then test your new workflow, and finally, get under the hood in debug mode to verify everything is working correctly. Let's get started. Okay, so here's the request. The sales team is asking that when a new lead is created in Salesforce, that the first name and email of that new lead be automatically sent to their team's Slack channel. Here's where we can take this request and, using some simple logic, begin to break it up into a workflow. All workflows have three main considerations. It always starts with a trigger, and a trigger is simply the initial event that sets the workflow into motion. From our request, we can see that the trigger is when a new lead is created in Salesforce. The next consideration are the conditions, and a condition is anything that starts actions when certain criteria are met. So the conditions for our request are to pull the first name and email address for new leads from Salesforce. And finally, we have the action, which is the task that the workflow performs automatically for you. Here, we can see that our action is to have the information pulled from Salesforce sent in a message to the sales team Slack channel. Connectors are the main building blocks of your workflows. So while we're here, let's quickly identify the connectors that we'll need in building out this workflow. Since the trigger is when a new lead is generated in Salesforce, our first connector will be Salesforce. Next, our condition is to pull data from Salesforce, so our second connector will also be Salesforce. And finally, since our action is to send a message to Slack, well, you guessed it, our last connector will be Slack. Now, one note on the condition. They've requested that only new leads be sent over, so we'll add a step in our condition to verify that this is truly a new lead before sending a message to Slack. We'll need to make sure we're logged into Trey, Salesforce, and Slack. Trey, obviously because that's where we're building the workflow, but Salesforce and Slack because we'll need to authenticate the connectors as we build, and also so we can test the workflow once it's built. Quick pro tip, I also like to have my Trey IO documentation open in a browser just in case I need to reference something. Okay, let's get building. Here we are on the Trey canvas, and the first thing we do is click on New Workflow, and then From Scratch. Now we'll give our workflow a name. This is New Lead to Slack, and click Next. Okay, now it's time to add our trigger connector, and remember we said that was Salesforce. So we type Sales, choose Salesforce, and click Create Workflow. Now here we are in our brand new workflow. We have our trigger, but we need to complete the trigger setup, which you can do by simply clicking on the connector to see the properties window. Here we can see at the top the trigger is set to On Record Create, which is what we want. And to keep things organized, I like to set the description to something related to the job. Next, I'll add my Salesforce authentication. The trigger is set to run when a new record is created, but remember, we only want the new lead. So we need to specify that in input data. So I'll type lead and choose it from the dropdown. Next, I will click to enable our workflow, so be ready when it's time to test. Now we need the next connector for our condition. I'll open the connector library. I'll search for sales, find Salesforce, click and drag, and there we are. We're taken directly into the connector properties window, and I'll start by setting the description to get lead details, just to keep it organized. I will click here to add my Salesforce authentication again. In input data, we need to specify that the record type is lead. So again, I'll click here, I'll type lead, and I'll choose from the available choices in the drop-down menu. Fields is where we set what we're pulling from the new lead profile. And remember that we needed the lead's first name, so I'll type first and grab the first name. And then we also needed the email address, so I click Add Fields for second field, type email, and choose that from the drop-down menu. Now remember, the sales team indicated they only wanted new leads, so to do that, we can add a condition. So I'll click on Condition, and then under Field, I'm going to search for Lead, and from the choices, I'll choose Lead ID, and that's what we're going to verify against. Next in Operator, Lead ID will be equal to, so I'll choose equal to. And then under Value, I'm going to change this. I come over here. If I click, I can choose this from lots of things. So I'll choose JSON path, and I'll click on Value, and then I can click and drag right up to onRecordCreate, and then copy that JSON path directly into the value. Okay, so we have our trigger, we have our condition. Let's go set up our action. I'll return to the connector library, and now I'll type Slack. I'll click to drag our final connector over, and there it is. Back in the connector properties, click on Describe, and I'll set my description to send message to Slack. Okay, now I'll authenticate, and I'll authenticate with my Slack profile. And then here in input data, we need to choose the Slack channel. It should populate based on your login, so you should just make the appropriate choice. Here in message, we can begin to craft our message that will be sent to the sales team in Slack. I'll type that we have a new lead. And here is where we need to pull the first name that the condition connector collected. So the easiest way to do that is go back to Get Lead Details and then click on Output Data. Find first name until you highlight and click on Copy Path. Return to the Send Message to Slack, Input Data, Message, and then just paste it. I'll now type @email. And here we'll do the same thing that we did with first name to retrieve the email address, right? We'll go back to Get Lead Details, Output Data, hover over Email, Copy Path, return to Slack, Input Data, Message, and paste. And that's your first workflow. Trigger, condition, and action all set. Okay, let's see if it works. I have Salesforce open to the Leads tab. I'll click on New to bring up the New Leads window. Be Mr. And first name is Clark. And then last name is Kent. Of course, Mr. Clark Kent works at the Daily Planet. And then email, we need that, clark@dailyplanet.com. Okay, so now we click Save. That'll save our new lead. You can see it's been saved. Oh, and you can see Slack has just alerted us that we have a new message from Trey that we have a new lead, Clark@Daily Planet. And if you check the time, you'll note that only took 5 minutes to create. At the very beginning, I mentioned the debugger, so let's check it out. At the top, you can click on Debug, and you'll see the debug window appear in the left, showing the last instance that this workflow was run. I can click to drill down, and it shows the state for each connector run in that instance, as you can see here. I want to verify the lead ID was pulled correctly, so I'll click on Record Create, and you can see in the output that it identifies the ID that it pulled from Salesforce. So there it is. And now I can go back up here to Salesforce, and I can verify that against the lead ID indicated in the URL. And here we can see that they're the same. Okay, now we want to make sure that the condition that we set in the connector correctly verified the lead ID before sending the data. So Get Lead Details, and then we can see here that it did in fact correctly verify the value for the lead ID. Great, and then you can see here in the output that it grabbed the first name correctly and the email that we requested. We know that the message arrived in Slack because we saw it, but if you wanted to verify in the logs, you can drill down into output data to see if the correct data was sent. So come to output, you can see in the text, it did in fact grab the name, and we can scroll over and see it had the email as well. If you were troubleshooting something and you wanted to rerun the same workflow to see if it was working any differently, you could hover over here and just click on the replay icon, and it'll run the same workflow again. Oh, you can see we got another message from Slack. So it was successfully run, and we are all set. And that wraps it up for our module on creating a workflow in just 10 minutes. I hope this helped you see just how easy it is to build a workflow in Tray and automate your processes. If you want to check out more helpful tutorials, documentation, Tray Academy, or submit a ticket, click on Getting Help from your Tray main page. Thanks, and see you next time.